Last week, we had been discussing about yoga. I had picked up one particular couplet from Swarved, which was actually yoga yoga sab koi kahe, yoga na jana koi, ardh dhar urad chale, yoga kahave soe. That was the couplet from sixth canto, first chapter, first couplet. Today, I'm a little bit elaborating it more. What is the meaning of yoga actually? Many times in today's world, I think since last 5 6 years since the International Day of Yoga has been introduced, the whole world now know what is yoga at least. But what is the real meaning of yoga? Actually, the real word is not yoga, it is yog. We all know that because yog the word has come from Sanskrit. The meaning of this word is union. Union means addition. But when we are talking about addition, addition of what with what? To add, there has to have two entities. Then only we can add it, right? What are those two entities? In the world of spirituality, the one end to which we are adding something is definitely the Supreme Being, the Almighty, the God. What is the other entity which we are trying to unite it with that Almighty? Some people say it is mind. Some people say yoga means it is the union of body, mind, and soul all together. But which entity we are talking about? Are we talking about multiple entities to be united with that Supreme Being, or there is only one, or what exactly it is? Let me elaborate a little bit more on this particular fact. When we are going to unite something, the two objects, be it more than two or two only, both those two objects or those two entities must have similar characteristics. Otherwise, the union will not sustain for long. That's for sure. The union will not sustain for long. Then, what is the characteristic of the entities we are talking about? When we're talking about the Supreme Being, the Almighty, what are the characteristics of Almighty? We probably can know about this by reading or listening to some preachers or other things. But definitely we know there are three basic infinite characteristics of the Almighty. That number one is it is the truth. That means it exists in its own form, in a conscious form. That is number one characteristic. Second characteristic is it is full of bliss, right? It is full of bliss. And it has its own desire at its own level. So even if we talk about just one, the one is the conscious entity. So the Supreme Being is a conscious entity. Even if we just talk about this particular characteristic, which entity of ours is conscious, so that we can unite that to that supreme conscious power? Is it body? Is it mind? Is it our intellect? Or it's the soul? Or it's something else? We have to understand this very clearly. And actually, we have to understand it factfully. Is our body a conscious element, a conscious entity? Think about it. Is our mind a conscious entity? Is our intellect a conscious entity? Or is our soul, which is the conscious entity? We have to understand this very, very clearly. To just in few words, let me tell you that our body is not a conscious entity. It is an inert entity. It doesn't function on its own. It's just momentary. As long as a conscious energy is inside us, which is the soul, this body will function. Once that conscious energy will go out, the prana shakti will go out, the body will not function. So body cannot be considered as conscious entity on its own. Like the moon doesn't have its own light. it's the light of the sun. Although in the night we say it's the light of the moon, but ultimately it's the light of the sun. It's not its own light. If sun would not be there, the light of the moon would not exist. Similarly, if the soul will not exist in this body will not function at all. What about mind? Mind has a dual role. Sometimes it is connected with the soul, and that's how it becomes conscious. In a similar way, if there is an electricity and there is an iron rod, right? When we touch that iron rod with that electricity wire, the current will flow in that particular rod as well. And that rod will become a good conductor of electricity at that time point. But as soon as we take that out from there, the connection is loosened. And that means the rod has been taken out from that connection. The rod is rod and electricity is on its own. The mind is in a similar way. When the mind is connected to the conscious entity, the soul, then it becomes at that time point function as a conscious entity because it is connected with the conscious entity. But when it is not, that means when it is connected with the inert objects like our sense organs, like our body, and it is functioning outside, it is not a conscious entity. So the mind is playing a dual role. So from here also we can very easily understand that mind does not have the conscious element on its own. It is conscious only when it is connected to the soul, otherwise not. What about intellect? Intellect is also defined by Sadhguru Siddhafal Devji Maharaj in a very, very specialized form, that this intellect is not a conscious element. That means it doesn't exist on its own all the time. It has come from somewhere. It has come from the Brahman. It has come from the Brahma, Akshar Brahma. So what is left? It's the soul which is left. And the soul is the conscious energy. Soul is the conscious element. Why? Because it has characteristic of to do effort. It has a characteristic of desire, and it has a characteristic called knowledge. So these are the three basic characteristics which define being conscious. One is desire, one is the knowledge, and the another one is the effort to do something. So this is the soul, which is the conscious entity, which has the characteristics of being conscious or in a state of consciousness. So when we talk about yoga, it's the only soul which has to be united with the Supreme Soul. Nothing else. The mind, the intellect, the body cannot be united to the Supreme Soul. That cannot happen. So when we talk about yoga, it simply means uniting our soul with the Supreme Soul. And that's the simplest definition of yoga. Now the point comes, where are we? Are we established in yoga? Are we doing yoga? Are we? If not, what is the hurdle? Even if theoretically we know what is the meaning of yoga, what is the hurdle? Can we not go immediately to the basis of the soul and let us unite the soul to the Supreme Soul? We cannot, because there are lots of problems with us. And the biggest problem is the mind. The second one is the ego. These are the two biggest problems for us. And correcting ourselves, rectifying ourselves in such a way that we can control our mind, we can control our ego, we can reduce, minimize to zero our ego so that we can surrender to the Almighty, then only we would reach to the real level of consciousness, the consciousness of the soul. And from there onward, it's much more easier to unite ourselves with the Supreme Soul. So the Vihangam Yoga actually explains all these practical aspects of the aim of a life, that what is the meaning of yoga. If we are saying we are doing yoga, that means the soul has to be united to the Supreme Soul and nothing else. We talk more about yoga and Vihangam Yoga, but for today, this is all about